Hi, guys. Glad you guys could all join us tonight. We'll be joined shortly by Susie. There she is. Hey, Susie.
Hi.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, we got to get together more often.
Oh, I wonder why we haven't been.
I don't know.
We're not talking about that tonight.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Right.
Sorry. We are, if anybody's asking, and this is whispered in my ear, we are socially distanced apart because actually not further than 6 feet because we're not wearing masks. Mostly because who wants to listen to somebody that all you can see is my eyeballs. So, but we did want to do this together because hopefully we enjoy each other's company. But and it's fun. So, but we are socially separated. So we are going to talk about Susie's new book, Stories That Bind Us.
I have a copy too.
Oh, how convenient. It's like you got it from the bookstore. If you haven't read it yet, sorry for the spoilers that we talked about. We are going to try to keep them down to a minimum, but sometimes, you know what, we're going to assume that everybody's read it. If not, order at bakerbookhouse.com and you'll get a copy in the mail signed by Susie. So tell us about Stories That Bind Us. Where did the idea come from?
Interestingly, there's a story behind it, which if you know me, there's always a story behind it. But after I wrote All Manner of Things, I was struggling to come up with the next idea for another book. And every idea I sent to my editor, it wasn't right. Like we agreed, this isn't it, keep trying. And it got to be August and I needed to start writing. And I thought, I'm never going to have a good idea again. And so I despaired and went on vacation. That's what we do. And my vacation that year with my family was to go and spend a bunch of time in Detroit, just seeing all of the sights there, going to a Tigers game. And it was great. It was fantastic. But while we were there, we went to Belle Isle, which is, if you're not from Michigan, Belle Isle was this like wonderland back in the heyday, in the 50s, the 40s, the 30s. And now it has fallen into disrepair and now they are rebuilding it. So we went there and we walked into this teeny tiny aquarium that they have. And the instant I walked in and I saw the jade green tiled ceiling, the whole idea for Betty's story popped into my head. This has never happened before. It's probably never going to happen again. And I went to the hotel after that and I emailed my editor, Kelsey, and I was like, here's the story. And she emailed back and said, all right, go with it. And I thought, this is going to be such an easy story to write. And I was wrong. It was so much harder than anything I've ever written. But that's where the story idea came from. And if you read the story, you'll see the Belle Isle Aquarium in the story. But the story was, or the idea that I got was basically about how story heals our hearts and binds us together. It binds us to the people that we share our history with, because the stories that we lived together bind us together. And they bind us to God because we have a storytelling God who the Bible is full of stories that he wants us to know, and a God who is writing our story daily. And it also, I thought of the level of how this story binds me to the people that read it. And it stops being my story once it reaches the hands of others and it becomes our story.
Awesome. Well, that's a neat process too. One of the questions I was going to ask, and it kind of leads into it, is, are you one of those that knows the beginning and the middle and the end of the story when you start writing? Or are you one that follows kind of where your characters head?
Well, I don't know. Every book has been different. So with paint chips, my very first one, I totally like stumbled the whole way I was writing it, so I had no idea what was happening. I still don't know how that novel got written because my kids were all toddlers. But with All Manner of Things, I knew the beginning and the end, but I didn't know the middle. And with Betty's story, I did know everything except the end. And it's interesting because I turned the novel into my editor with no end. I said, there's no end to this thing. And I don't know that there ever will be. And then I was sitting down talking to my novelist friend Erin Bartles. And I was telling her, I was complaining to her. I was straight up whining and pouting at her, which we do to each other sometimes. And she said, and she's a very matter of fact person. She said, Susie, you know how this story ends. Just get to it and just do it. And I was like, oh, you're right. Okay. And then it was over. It was solved. So Erin Bartles kind of kicked me and then he finished the book.
Was it the ending you were hoping for then?
It was better than I was hoping for. Yeah.
I agree. That was kind of a leading question.
Yeah. I don't want to give any spoilers.
No, we're not going to talk about the ending, but
I do want people to know that there's hope.
there is.
It's a hopeful ending.
Yeah. It's a very emotional story. There's a lot that goes in there. Betty herself is learning as she goes. And I know you have mentioned that you named her Betty because of your grandmother, correct?
Yes, my dad's mom.
So
Betty, well, she wasn't Betty Sweet. I stole that name from a high school friend because it's just the cutest last name I've ever seen.
And that she runs a bakery. So why a bakery?
Because I watched a lot of Great British Baking Show before I wrote this book.
Okay.
I'm just going to be honest. And here's the thing. I can't eat gluten, which you know. I can't eat gluten. And so it's basically torture watching that show because none of those things are going to bake the same way. And honestly, there was a character, or no, he's not a character. He's a real human being. I get the two mixed up sometimes. But if anyone has seen the season with Howard, I had to write him in. He's this unassuming, shy, very timid man who makes very, very delightful bakes. And he was the inspiration for the character Albert.
I can see that. I think that's the season my husband and I are watching right now. So
that's a good season.
I like Howard. He's very cute. So, well, how fun. Okay, so you set your books in Michigan. I think what I really like is that you don't set them in the resort towns like Saugatuck or Holland, or even the big towns like Lansing or Detroit. You set them in where most of us live. Is there a certain town you base everything on, or are you just piecing things together, I guess?
For some of them, I piece them together. For La Fontaine, which is the fictional town in Stories That Bind Us, it's kind of like that weird space between Lansing and Detroit. Not weird. If you live in that area, it's not weird. It's lovely and wonderful. But it's kind of that in between where if you need something, you go 45 minutes to Lansing or 45 minutes to Detroit. And so kind of like Howell area, that's not tiny town, but it's not big town. It's a place.
It's just a place. Did you, I should just ask, I think I know the answer. Did you grow up in a town like that, or did you grow up in a smaller town?
I grew up in Lansing.
Okay.
So I grew up in the city of Lansing. Seeing a squirrel was really exciting. So big city, or not big city, but not small town where everybody knows each other. But I got some of the small town feel because I went to a very small Christian school. And so that's where I learned about how everybody knows everything and everybody's involved. And then I went to a small Christian college too that was very much like that. And so there's just something that appeals to me about that. I don't know what. I've never lived in a small town. Never, not once.
I grew up in a small town, and I think you got it down pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah, riding my bike wherever I wanted to go, and if I did anything wrong, somebody ratted me out to my parents. It was perfect. So in your stories, has you ever been surprised by what a character has done?
Yes.
Can you share? I mean, I don't want to give anything away, but those are always fun stories where.
Okay, so I won't spoil.
Okay.
But this is probably the most surprising was when I was writing A Cup of Dust, which was however many novels ago. But it's the first in the Pearl Spence series. And in it, toward the end, Pearl is in the cellar with Eddie. And he's dreadful. He's horrible. He's the creepiest person I've ever written. I don't ever want to write somebody like him again, ever. He's one of the reasons I don't write bad guys anymore into my books. He gave me such bad nightmares. But he's got his gun and it's pointing right at Pearl's dad. And when Eddie says, I can't, in my mind, the story was going a different way. But when I wrote it, when he said, I can't, it went the complete opposite way. And I remember typing that, and I was sitting in Starbucks when I typed that scene and just gasping out loud, which, when you're in public, what are you going to do? But they knew the crazy ones over there. But I gasped out loud because it surprised me so much. And I love it when that happens, though, because I think that's where the story needs to go. And it's not me forcing it to go there.
Yeah. I like that too, because I think sometimes it's a little more genuine that way.
Yeah.
Even if you're an outliner, you can tell an author that it's like, okay, it's going this way no matter what. Whereas one goes, okay, this is where it can go, even though I didn't plan it. So I'm glad to hear that. That makes for good reading.
Well, and I think that the times when I have tried for A Trail of Crumbs, I tried to force the story to do what I wanted it to. And it didn't work. It was horrible. It was a wretched, wretched book. And I turned it in. I told my editor, this is a really bad book. And she said, well, take it back. And we talked about the plot. And she said, I think you're trying to do too much. So simplify it. And she was right. That was Dawn Anderson from Creole. She was right. And so aspiring authors, editors are your best friend. They make you look so smart when really they're the smart one.
I should ask you for Pearl's series. Do you prefer writing series or standalones?
I think Pearl was a very special case. I think of that series more as one big book. I don't think I'll write another series. It's such an emotional investment. And unless a character who is as special as Pearl comes along, then I won't. But Pearl, there's just something about that girl.
Oh, it was fun watching her grow up, even if it was a small part of time there. But yeah, she grew up in a very difficult time to be a preteen and teen. So
yes.
Yeah. And I think I know, and I'm sorry, as you guys listen to this, these are just questions that I thought of too, is did you write the first one of that with the idea there's going to be 3, or did you start as a standalone and realize there was more to the story?
That is a very good question because at the time I was offered a 1-book contract for that. And I knew it was a series, but we knew if we played it right and if we left a cliffhanger type at the end of A Cup of Dust, and then we pitched the next novel, it was so compelling, they'd have to take it. So the way I set it up, Pearl, at the very last day of the book, it's not a spoiler because it's history, but the day that April woke up was sunshiny and beautiful. And it turned out to be one of the worst dust storms in the Dust Bowl. And so I left it at, it's good. The Dust Bowl's over. Everything's fine. And then pitched to the editor, hey, not everything's fine. It's going to get worse. And so they picked up the second one. And then later they picked up the third because the second one was a definite cliffhanger.
Yes. Yeah, I've had people ask me if you wrote that as a split, books 2 and 3 as a split manuscript, but I thought they were separate.
I was trying to play the system.
Well, there you go. At least you're honest too. So, if you could write any other genre, what would you write and why?
Without a doubt, I would write middle grade. And Gary Schmidt, who writes middle grade and YA, and is kind of my hero, he said so well last fall what at Breathe Writers Conference, what exactly the reason that I want to write it. There's this magical thing about being between 10 and 12. That it's a magical time in a person's life when you're growing up, but you're still a kid. And people expect things of you, but they still expect you to be a kid. And it's really this time when you're changing so drastically. And my kids are around that age. My boys are turning 12 next week.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. And we read together still. And those books speak such truth and they have such an impact on the kids and on me. And I just see some really good things happening in that genre. And someday I will write a middle grade book. Mark my words.
Well, I like that idea because of the stories that are shared by Betty to Hugo. I mean, the first thing that popped in my head is these should be in a kids book collection. So at least you got your start.
That would not make me so mad. That would not make me mad.
Yeah, I like them.
Thank you.
And then you know what? It leads me to ask: were they completely your ideas, or did you get ideas from other people for those stories that were in there?
Those were just my ideas. Well, but I give them to Betty because I don't feel like I wrote them or told them. I feel like that was Betty. It was all her work. And someone who read the book said, well, I love the stories that Betty made up. And then they said, oh, but I guess you did. And I said, no, Betty gets credit for those. It's this weird, when I'm writing, I write in first person. And it doesn't feel like me. It feels like them. And I know that sounds crazy to people who aren't me, but that's how it works.
I think we're all getting used to the voices in our head right now. So, you know, it doesn't sound as crazy as it used to. So
That's good.
So, tell me, is that elephant story true?
Yes.
Okay. So let me jump in here a minute. If you are watching, please feel free to send questions in. You can do that on chat or the Q&A if you're on Zoom, or you can do it right on the Facebook page. They will all come to us here and we will share them with Susie. And actually, I'm going to think ahead a little bit, and we're going to jump ahead and then we're going to go to some questions. Do you have a next book planned? And if so, do you have a release date?
I'm actually finishing the novel before I turn it into my editor in July, which let's hope that June feels like a long month because I've got a lot of work to do. I don't have a release date yet, but it will be next spring or summer. And I'm really excited about this one. This one is a little bit of a departure for me, but I think in a good way.
Can you tell us, is it like the same historical? Is it more contemporary? You don't want to tell us yet.
Oh, I can tell you a little. It's a little bit of both. So I decided that it is surrounding the events directly after the United States pulling out of the Vietnam War. And the story could not just be told in 1975. It had to be told in 1975, 1988, and 2013. And so it follows the same family through 3 different decades. Wow. And how the war impacts them, how some of the events following it change them. And yeah, that's all I'll say. But it's really exciting. And I took on, in one of the points of view, it's a male voice. And so that is very different for me.
That will be different. I'm looking forward to it already. I got to tell you, one of the comments we got was, we want a middle grade fiction novel from Susie. Now?
Yeah, right now. Okay.
That would be awkward, don't leave.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry.
And this is a great question. All Manner of Things was also set in the 1960s. So how did the research differ between the 2 books?
Okay, so Stories That Bind Us is set in 1963. All Manner of Things is 67. The 4 years between the 2 books changed so much culturally in our country. There definitely was a huge shift after the assassination of JFK. The war amped up, and people changed, values changed, and the music vastly different. The social climate was hugely different, style. My mom, when I was talking to my mom about it, who grew up in that time and so greatly resents it being called historical fiction, by the way. Yeah, it's okay. But she said the 60s were still kind of the 50s. And then after that, the 60s were their own beast. And I think that researching for 1963, I didn't realize how much I enjoyed that part of the 60s as much as I enjoy the late 60s to learn. A lot happened, but people didn't talk about everything, and they didn't talk about politics. They didn't, not very much. You know, they were more polite and cute. And style was just amazing in the early 60s. And I really want Betty's car. But like the poodle skirts, I know that was late 50s. I know, but that was carried over in the early 60s too. Like the pretty like Jackie O'Neill or Jackie Kennedy style. That's what I'm talking about in the early 60s. I couldn't pull that off. I can't either. I look like I'm trying so hard. Like the fancy, yeah.
But okay, asked 2 questions, but they kind of ask the same thing. One says, how do you come up with characters' names for the stories that bind us? Or how do you choose characters' names for any of your books?
Well, okay, I'm just going to focus on Stories That Bind Us because.
Hey, we're talking about that book.
Hey, it's right there.
We have it.
Yeah. So, a few of the names, this is a little embarrassed. So for Hugo's name, Hugo was a 5-year-old nephew of Betty. And I got his name. I was thirsty, and I grabbed a Coke out of the cooler at the store, and it's when they had the names on them.
Oh yeah.
And I grabbed one, and it said Hugo, and I was like, Hugo is the name. That's the name. I've never heard of a more perfect name for this child. So that's how I got his name, and I still have the little sticker. I took it.
It does fit him, by the way. If you haven't read the book yet, you're going to fall madly in love with Hugo.
Oh, I love Hugo. And there's a quote in the front of the book from Victor Hugo that perfectly like sets the tone for the book. So read those quotes from the author's pick, please, because they really matter. For Betty, again, that's my grandma's name. Pearl was my other grandma's name. And my husband told me I couldn't name my children Betty or Pearl, so I named characters Betty and Pearl. Nick and Dick in this book, Nick is actually modeled after my cousin Nick Lomax, who is probably not watching this. And but it's fine. He was the kind of kid who in church would crawl under the pew during the service and go visit that aunt, or get a candy from that aunt. So that's him. But Marvel and Stan DeYoung, who are Betty's sister and brother-in-law, they were the grandparents of my lifelong best friend Laura, and they were bonus grandparents to me. And how perfect is the name Marvel? I think it's, when I was a kid, I was like, that is the coolest name ever. And when I was writing Betty, I knew that she needed her sister-in-law to be a rock for her and solid. And I thought, of all the people in the world, the real Marvel and Stan were that way for my great aunt Bertha and Uncle Ken. And so just watching their friendship when I was a kid, it translated into the book.
Awesome. That's always interesting to hear where, because I know one author one time said, I just flip the phone book until I find what I like. So that's a little more creative, I guess. Not that reading the phone book is bad either. So again, send in your questions. We're doing great here. We love all the questions you're sending in, comments, anything like that you have. So tell me, you write deeply emotional books. You really do. I mean, they're issue driven one way or another. Is there a reason behind that? Is it easier for you to do something like that? Or I guess I'm not even sure where I want to go with the question other than, you do that and it makes your books really stand out.
Well, thank you. I think that a good way to maybe phrase that is, why do you make people cry?
Yeah. I will give you that. Well, your books did.
I am a deeply emotional person. And I think that that's how I process, is by writing. So I process my emotions. I process what's going on in my life through writing. And I've learned that it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's going on right this moment that I'm processing in the novel. It might be something I'm afraid of, or for instance, losing my husband early. That's a big fear for me. And so imagining that in Betty's life was extremely hard. And I felt a whole lot of emotion. And I don't know how I could write without feeling all that emotion, but I think that one of the reasons I want to write like that is because years ago, I was reading a book by Lisa Sampson, and I had recently lost a friend, and I hadn't been able to grieve. There was something holding it back, and I couldn't grieve. But then when I read a book by Lisa Sampson, I finally was able to grieve, and I was able to cry and process all of that. And I think that so often people need something external to help them process emotion, to help them think things through. And if my fiction can do that, I'm happy about that.
Do you know the name of the Lisa Sampson book? Because I know that's going to be one of the questions we're going to get in like 3 seconds.
Sandwich?
Yes. I read that one, the sandwich something, and it is brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We would have to look it up really quickly, and we can get it because, yep, isn't that close? Because we both sit here looking like dorks. Yeah, that's it. But
Yeah.
Yes. It was the club sandwich.
And it's about the sandwich generation.
Yep.
Raising kids and taking care of their elderly parents.
Yes, and it was very, very well written because, and I can so relate to it now. Not
I
that I'm
love
raising
Lisa.
children anymore. But
Lisa Sampson forever.
keep writing. Okay, so we're going to backtrack a little bit, and I meant to ask this question. Thank you for sending it in. What kind of books do you read with you and your boys, your daughter also? What do you enjoy reading together?
We read wildly and eclectically. So we might read a book that just came out about a social issue. And then right now we're reading a book called, I don't even remember. I bought it here.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate that.
It's like a fantasy that involves the Bronte kids, like when they're kids, and it's exceptionally well written and very fun. We are going to read the Wing Feather Saga. We read fantasy. We read realistic fiction. We really explore fiction. They explore nonfiction on their own because their interests are so vast. But my key purpose in reading to them so often is that I want them to, number one, adore reading, which they all do. And number two, I want them to develop empathy and concern and care for those around them so that they will be their brother's keepers, so that they will want to help the least of these. And we do read the Bible to them. I think that fiction can also be a good supplement for that.
And on that thought, what are you personally reading right now besides scripture? No fair mentioning.
Right.
We all know.
Right. I have to remember what it's called. So I just finished Bethany Turner's Happy Bucket's Next Dish, and it's hilarious.
It's hilarious. The baking one too.
Yes.
Don't read them back to back. You'll just have to eat everything.
But it's fine. We can.
Okay.
We can.
Okay.
But I think that's her best work. I really do think. And I'm listening to Eric Larson's In the Garden of the Beasts, which is nonfiction, and it's about Americans living in Germany during the rise of Hitler. Wow. And it's terrifying. And that one that I'm reading with my kids. I cannot remember what it's called.
But it'll come to you when you're driving home. Yes. Just put it on Facebook later.
Yeah. But and then I'm going to start The White Rose Resists by Amanda Barrett soon. And I know it's gonna wreck me, but that's 2 Nazi books at once, but I can do it.
Yeah. I try to do that too, where I keep the Lisa Sampson book is Club Sandwich. Thank you for whoever sent that in.
Thank you, whoever. Yep. If it was you, Lisa. Just kidding.
That was, and again, I strongly recommend it.
It is great.
Are the twins in the book modeled after your twins?
No, they're not.
I knew that.
I try not to model my kids too much, but we value privacy for our children, and so I just want them to grow up and not be like, yeah, my mom wrote these crazy twins about me. So I modeled it after my cousin, who probably, and he thinks it's so funny that he's in this book. He thinks it's really funny.
That's always good, as long as they have a good sense of humor about it.
I told him after I wrote it. I'm not going to ask permission.
No, I'm always apologize later. I live and die by that some days. Somebody asked, what advice do you have for someone wanting to write a book, specifically researching the time periods associated with it?
Okay, so first of all, you've got to read a super ton. Find authors who you want to write similar to and read everything that they've written. The very best way to learn how to be a novelist is to read all kinds of different novels. So you need to be reading. Next, look for resources all about what it is to be writers and what goes into the writer's life. A great place to start is to go to the Breathe Writers Conference website, and you can just Google it, and they have like a bunch of sessions that you can download and listen to. And that conference is content heavy. It will be all online this year. You need to look into it. If you want to write, you need to get that community going. And as far as research goes, read a ton of nonfiction about the era you want to write. Watch documentaries. If Ken Burns has a documentary, you are golden, because those documentaries are fantastic. So those are just a few places to start.
Awesome. So for you, what is the hardest part about writing?
I don't know. Some days it all feels hard, if I'm honest. This book was extremely hard because it touched on some very personal, emotional trauma that I have experienced. Without telling you too much, it touches on my worst fear, which is losing my husband early, and one of the most traumatic things of my life, which was having a family member go through a mental health crisis. And it brought up a lot of those old emotions for me. So learning how to kind of separate myself from that every once in a while. But this is when you have friends that you can go to, friends who will distract you from it sometimes, friends who will remind you of scripture verses that will keep you floating. And the other answer is distraction is hard, especially with my kids home right now. 24/7. I love you guys are watching. You're fantastic. And I love you because you're so distracting and fun. But I still have to read a novel.
Your mom works. She just works at home.
Yeah.
If you weren't an author, what would you do?
Probably be a vagabond. I don't know. I'm a really bad employee. I really am. I'm horrible. Because I'm just not a very good employee. I think that I would love to try editing. I think that would be fun in some ways. Not like typo editing, talking like helping people develop their stories, but working in an office is not gonna happen. I did that once and it was horrible. I was horrible at it.
Yeah, I can maybe see that. So. Which part did Flannery the cat have in writing this book?
Okay, so Flannery is a real cat, and she's also a cat in this book because someone dared me to write her in, and I cannot for the life of me remember who dared me to do it, but I did it, whoever you are. Flannery, she, during the writing of All Manner of Things, she liked to perch on my shoulder, and then my physical therapist told me that she can't do that anymore because it was killing me. It was like something like weighing you down. Yeah, my cat. But so now she likes to, like, I'll put her little cat bed nearby and she'll sit on it and sleep on it, or she'll sit on my lap and sleep on my lap. And she's
Plays a
cat,
major role.
and she's fun. Yeah, I'm afraid of cats, but I like her.
I'm not afraid of cats.
Yeah.
Okay. For this one, we touched on it a little bit, but somebody's asking, what was something that surprised you during your research for this novel? Something you didn't know about the time period, or you didn't think happened during that time period? Good, tough question.
That is a really tough question. I think that one of the things that did surprise me was how much mental health care has changed since then. It's not perfect still by any means, but the stigma was even more severe back then. And so the way that changed, and also my research into, and I don't really go into it a whole lot in the book, but ECT, which is the electric shock treatment that we hear about, it sounds really scary, but it can and does save lives. And so that was really eye-opening to me, because going into this, I thought it was barbaric, and now I see that it has merit, and it saves people's lives.
That's interesting. So, well, I'm glad to hear that too, because that's a good thing, because I don't think I would have known that either. So.
Yeah, I don't think we talk about it very much.
Yeah. Which of your books would you like to have made into a movie if you could only have one? And who would be the lead characters? I mean, the lead actor and actresses. That was my addition to the question. So I don't
know. Especially after hearing Charles Martin talk about his experience last week with the movie, or which book was it?
The Mountain Between Us.
Yeah. That all scares me. And just the way that it would not be, it is very rare that a book is turned into a movie and I am pleased with the result. And that's why I usually don't watch them. So I think I would be very, very scared. But I think if things could go perfectly, I would really like. This is a really hard question.
I think it's a great question.
It is a great question. Yeah. But if I think that I would really like to see Betty's stories that I just made into a movie, just because she's such a sweet character in Hugo. And I think seeing their relationship, like actually visibly seeing them interact would be really sweet. I think Cynthia Rupti would be a really good Betty, because she's got that sweet voice. She's an author, if you don't know. She's an author of Christian fiction. She's the sweetest person, and I think that she would do. And I bet she does acting. How could she not?
Sure.
Come on, Cynthia. Come on, Cynthia. You can do it.
I didn't even think of it, because Betty in my head looked a little different than Cynthia, but it does fit. So.
But the voice.
The voice is perfect.
Right.
You're right.
That's
the voice would do it. So, when reading so many books, how do you make sure an idea you read does not end up in your book? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's a fantastic question.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow I'm able to compartmentalize it. Like my reading brain is separate from my writing brain. And something might inspire me or cause me to think of an idea. So I'll read something and I'll think, well, hey, what if this for this character? Which does get distracting when I'm reading. I'm like, whoop, nope, my book. But to me, they're completely separate. So I know Charles last week said that it can disturb his cadence. But for me, it's completely different. And if I'm not reading, my writing suffers.
That's interesting. I can see that. To be honest with you, since you brought it up, that Charles said he read so little, because I have heard that from other authors that they need to read to stay current, even, and with writing and such. So it was just an interesting perspective on that. I like hearing that. Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad you shared that, because with new writers, you have to be yourself, not a Susie, not a Charles, not a Francine. So yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. So, and then I have a couple more questions here. How often does your faith help you with your writing? And not only how often, but how?
For me, I would have a really hard time separating my faith life from my writing. I think that well, first of all, when there's a hard chapter, there are times where I'm like, please help me.
Right in the store, she yells it. It's very disturbing.
So I wear a sign around my neck that says, I'm writing a novel. Don't mind me. And nobody can see me because I got my mask on. But on top of that, I think that everything I write will always be informed by my faith. And I think that that's why hope is so important, and why taking care of other people is so important, and holding on when there's nothing left, and lament is a big part of the faith life too, that sometimes gets left out, but it's all over the Bible. So it's organic. It's just natural for me to write in light of my faith in Jesus, and want to please him in what I'm writing. I would be very sad if what I wrote showed him in a bad light. And so it's hard to answer this question because it's just part of it. It's just it's the reason for it. It's the force behind it. It's the fuel behind it. And it's always fun when I'm sitting in a sermon and I think, there it is. That's what I'm learning. And that's what my character is learning. And it's really interesting that whenever my character is learning something about their faith, it's something that I need to learn about my faith. So in that way, we are very connected. I don't know if that answers the question or not. Does it? Do you think?
I think so.
Okay.
Because I think it's very important in Christian fiction that the faith is very natural to the story. And if you're experiencing it or experienced it, it makes it part of the story because it's part of you. You know, whether the story is you. I mean, I know it's a character, but there's a difference between somebody that writes about their faith and somebody that writes about a faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. I know I appreciate it.
That said, I never want one of my books to be so preachy or such a club that someone who isn't a Christian can't pick it up and enjoy the story. And that is important to me because I think that so often we're concerned about preaching to each other when really we're supposed to be a light, and that light is supposed to be attractive to the world, where they see it and think, I want that. I want that hope. I want that joy, even in the midst of sorrow. So that's also very important to me.
Good. Now I have one last question here. We will be wrapping up soon unless somebody, strange hand comes wandering in with another one. Sounds like you're a fast reader. How many books do you typically read a month?
It depends. In the summer, I read a lot. I don't really keep track because I don't want to zoom through a book just to get it done so that I can have. It depends on the length of the book. It depends on if it's a hard book. Some books are hard to read, so it takes a long time. I can't give a number because I'm bad at math, but to me, it's more important that I'm learning from the books that I'm reading, and when I'm in the middle of writing, I'm a slow reader. It takes a long time, because I'm constantly putting the book read. How about this? This is how I walk around all the time, cutting a potato. What about this? I actually did cut my finger doing that. What about this in my book? Ouch. So I'm really dippy when I'm in the middle of writing a book. But in the summer, I take some time off when I'm researching for a book, and then I just read basic moments. Yeah.
This is going to be a little more off because it kind of struck me is if there was one book, and again, we're going to set aside scripture because that's the easy.
It's not really a book. It's our life.
It's something I always say I don't read books over, and I don't reread books, but okay, that one you have. So, so we set aside scripture. Is there a book or two that you would say shaped everything? I can't say everything. That's not a fair word, but shaped how you write.
Yeah. The first book I read that made me think, this is it. This is how I want to write, was Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, which is famously hated by ninth graders everywhere. But and you don't have to love it. You don't have to love what I love. But because of the pure raw emotion. Steinbeck wrote with so much emotion, and I felt so much emotion that it made me feel like there was a place for me in the literary world. And so Steinbeck, anything Steinbeck wrote, really, but that was the first. And I think another one, I love to read, so this is hard.
And to narrow it down to two is, or even three, is not fair, but
yeah, it isn't. It's not fair at all. But I know, do it anyway, Susie. When I was starting my writing life, writing novels, I started actually as a playwright, and then I transitioned to be a novelist. And at the time, I was trying to decide, do I write for which market do I write for? Thinking I can't separate my faith from my writing.
right.
And but I thought I was too hard-edged for the Christian market. And so I was looking, and I don't remember if it was Baker or Kriegel. I can't remember.
It had been Baker.
It was one of them. But
We love Kriegel too.
I was going through the fiction section, and I thought, well, none of this is really me. I'm glad that there are these books for people who are looking for this kind of book, but it's not what I'm going to write. And then I found this book that was like a circus tent and half a woman, like not that she was cut in half. It was just like one of those like artsy, like put it on a cover. Don't want you to be afraid. And it looked different. And I don't read the back of books. So I started reading it, and there's this person smoking in it and doubting themselves, and another person who is talking about how Jesus loves them, but there's doubt, and it's okay to doubt, and all of these like very nuanced scenes. And I just read the entire thing, not at the store I bought it, don't worry, but it was a book that made me think there is a place for what I write in the Christian market. And it was the book Embrace Me by Lisa Sampson. We're dropping Lisa's name all over the place today, and that's fine, because you all should read her books.
That one is phenomenal.
Yeah, that one, and then I started reading more of her books, and particularly The Passion of Mary Margaret. And I thought, this is where I need to be right now. And that was very formative for me. And I tried telling her that at a writer's conference, and I really scared her because I was so excited. And I was talking like this. My voice went up in the register. They heard me laughed about it, and she's not afraid of me anymore.
She took the restraining order.
Well, she says she's not. But that, I think that that convinced me, just write what you're supposed to write what you feel like writing, and everything will shake out in the mix, because it worked for her. And then I found out about her journey of how her writing changed within her career. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thanks for sharing that. We are slowly running out of time here, or rapidly, I should say. We could do this all night, and I don't think you want to listen to either one of us all night.
Yes, you do.
Slightly silly. I can Guarantee it. So, so if you haven't ordered your copy today and you haven't are looking for it, go to bakerbookhouse.com. Baker Bookstore is actually open. You can actually come by appointment and shop for a little while, making sure you wear your mask. Otherwise, we do curbside pickup too if you're uncomfortable coming in the store. But we have plenty of copies. They are signed by Susie. I'd show you this one. Oh, you know what? This one is the one I stole from the shelf. It's actually signed, which is good because this is my copy, so can't really have it. But thank you for joining us, Susie. We are so happy you were here. And you know, you got a standing invite to come in anytime. Maybe next time we'll actually have an audience. You know, it'll be a little different again. Well, we do have an audience, but thank you for joining us. Have a good night and read on, my friends.
Thank you.